Howdy y'all, thanks for clicking. I just want to put up a few disclaimers first. There are major spoilers ahead. If you have not watched Murder Drones, I recommend clicking off. Secondly, this is all just my opinion and an attempt to convince you why I'm right, which I obviously am. If anyone disagrees though, that's completely fine by me. Don't go attacking people, and make your own opinion and stuff, yeah? This is a little bit more aggressive than I really wanted my first video essay to be, but this topic really pulled me in. You probably read the title, but if you didn't, I will be attempting to convince you why Doll wouldn't make sense as the main villain in Murder Drones. Some people, like me honestly, might find this topic obvious, but I've seen some people talking about it and want to offer my stance. Two prominent content creators have mentioned this idea and I just can't get behind it. I'm mostly going to focus on why I don't think being a villain fits Doll as a character. The premise of Doll being a villain is Doll herself becoming a villain. A complex rewrite would effectively make her a different character, which defeats the point of this argument. For you to understand what I'm about to talk about though, let's first define what exactly a villain is. Firstly, I want to mention that when I talk about heroes in this section, I mean the main protagonists and their group of misfits who usually have sound morals. Is that cool with y'all? Fantastic. As consumers of media, we love characters who oppose the heroes. We love them so much in fact that we've made countless different silly little names for them. For this video I want to focus on the three I could see most commonly tied to Doll, those being a villain, an antagonist, and an anti-hero. Let's go through them least to most evil, mostly because I want to wait to talk about villains because they're the most vital to this discussion. That means we're starting with anti-heroes. Anti-heroes are kind of beloved throughout fiction. These are characters who might side with the heroes or fight for the same cause, but usually do so in an unconventional way, typically directly opposing the values of the heroes. Anti-heroes are most often considered morally gray, doing the right things for the wrong reasons or through the wrong actions. For a hero who never kills, there might be an anti-hero who finds killing to be the only option. Maybe a pacifist hero might be accompanied by an anti-hero who only solves their problems through violence. I'm sure you get it by now. While anti-heroes fight with the heroes, antagonists in stories are characters who directly fight against the protagonist. Antagonists could have good or bad morals. As long as their goals conflict with the protagonist, they can be considered an antagonist. Antagonists could be as simple and meaningless as a character who appears to fight the heroes once, or they could be as complex as a tyrannical dictator it takes 6 seasons for the protagonist to defeat. They could be deep characters with countless interesting motivations driving their every action, or they could just be fighting the protagonist for fun. Antagonists are expansive and encompass a wide range of characters. Antagonists could even become anti-heroes if they switch to the side of the protagonist. The most important thing to take away from this is that antagonists do not have to be evil. They could be fighting for good. As long as they're fighting against the protagonist, they can be an antagonist. Think of Jay in the pilot. She directly opposes Uzi and N, but as far as we, the audience, can tell, Jay is just doing her job. She isn't completely evil because she's following orders from JC Jensen, a soldier fighting in an unjust war. Villains, on the other hand, are evil, and their evil actions drive the plot. Villains are also typically the main antagonist of the story, the big bad the protagonist must defeat. Villains often have a motivation, but it usually justifies them becoming evil instead of justifying their actions. Villains can have sympathetic motivations, but will often be unsympathetic since the audience should be driven to dislike the villain. Sin is a villain. She's a planet destroyer with no clearly defined motivation, has genocided the human race, and is looking to eradicate all drones as well. Pretty clear-cut a villain, I'd say. So where does Doll fit into this? Some may consider Doll an anti-hero because she has the same goals as our protagonist. To me though, Doll is an antagonist. She actively fights against the protagonist, Uzi, in 3 of the 8 episodes and almost kills one of the 3 main characters. Something to make clear though is Doll is not evil. Doll's main goal after the promining is to free herself from the Solver, and if she happens to kill V along the way, that'd be fantastic. Which she almost does. Killing drones, especially in the gruesome ways Doll often does during the promining, could be considered evil, but in this series I'm not so sure that's true. 2 of our 3 main characters are actively committing genocide at the beginning of the show, and the protagonist had an entire episode dedicated to making a joke of their killing spree. I'm not convinced killing drones fits our qualification for evil in this show. The most evil thing Doll does is unleash the Sentinels on Uzi, Envy, and Tessa during Dead End. She's only unjustified in trying to kill 2 of these 4 characters, Uzi, who extended a hand to try and help her just a short time ago, and Tessa, a quote-unquote human who she previously tried to help, and from Doll's point of view hasn't done anything wrong. It doesn't seem completely evil to me. Are the lives of 2 genocidal maniacs equal to the lives of 2 innocents? It really doesn't seem as villainous when you look at it like that, right? Doll's most villainous actions are pretty easily justified, and for that I'd consider her to be closer to an antagonist instead of a complete villain. And I don't think that's the debated part of this discussion. But I would go further and argue Doll isn't a villain, and that's what makes her such an interesting character. To me, reducing Doll to a villain instead of a complex antagonist would just mute what actually makes her special as a character. This isn't to say all villains are boring and simple, but for Doll to be a villain, the writers would have to find a convoluted reason for her to directly fight Uzi. The writers would have to get rid of the entire plotline around Doll trying to free herself from the Solver, and probably pull a contrived misunderstanding out of their ass to give Doll enough of a motivation to directly fight Uzi. The only reasonable way I could think of for Doll becoming the series' main villain is if Doll loses all sense of self-control and tries everything possible to kill V. There are a few major problems with this though. Firstly, this killer Doll, as I'll refer to her, wouldn't be interesting for very long, probably lasting 1 or 2 episodes after the promining, leading to a final confrontation, while in the current series, Sin and the Absolute Solver are the main villains after the promining, with Sin taking a majority of that all on her own. Secondly, by the time Doll is introduced as an antagonist, and in this case, a villain, Uzi herself doesn't have a concrete motivation for even defending V. Uzi doesn't care about V this early in the series. To Uzi, V is just a killer robot that's tried to kill her and her kind countless times, including during the promining. Finally, Doll is a complete non-threat after the promining. There is no suspense and there are no stakes because they've already beaten Doll before. Also, a large part of Doll's character is how completely useless she is against Solver users, because she's so used to overwhelming people with her powers. Uzi barely has access to her powers in their fight, but still would have beaten Doll and was effectively a 1v1 because Doll can't instantly squish her to death. The way the series is written now, Doll doesn't want to fight Uzi. Uzi just happens to be in the way of her goals. This makes Doll a lot more interesting, because she has her own agency apart from the actual story that follows Uzi. It's what makes Doll an interesting character. Forcing her to bend to the will of the story would only make her character and the series as a whole greatly suffer. There are issues with the way Doll is written in the current story, but the answer is not to make her the main villain. Villain Doll would need a complete rewrite of her original character, most likely stripping her of what makes her an interesting character in the first place. Even if Doll becomes the villain of the first of 2 seasons, at least half the first season would be filler episodes to make up for the limited time Doll would remain an interesting villain. The story would drag and become substantially worse. The whiplash following the promining's extremely fast-paced action to the rest of the season's slow pace would be even worse than the tone change from the rest of the current series and Home. And if what you're asking for is a complete rewrite of Doll's character, then why are you bothering to say Doll should have been the main villain? Because you might as well say Alice should have been the main villain, or Khan, or any other character. You might as well just aim straight where this argument is actually intended and try to improve Sin or make an entirely new villain instead of trying to make Doll into a worse character. Thank you so much for watching. I plan to do more of this kind of stuff, so if you have any suggestions, they are greatly appreciated. Telling me how stupid I am in the comment section is also greatly appreciated. I have some ideas for my next video, but I'm always willing to take suggestions from y'all if there's a topic you want me to yap about. That's all from me though. Have a good one.